Now, far from it, Senna. If anything, this actually tells me that not only is the Bank of Ghana governor an unrepentant sinner, but the finance minister himself is an accomplice in all the sins that were committed at the Bank of Ghana. You know, it's a very long excuse letter that is not doing, hasn't done anything at all to assuage the concerns that many people have. You only need to read the details of that letter, and you'll find that it's basically, at best, it's a spin. At worst, it's a deliberate attempt to hoodwink or deceive the general population, to deceive Ghanaians, and create an impression that the Bank of Ghana governor has done a yeoman's job. When in reality, what they have done is they have basically wasted our money and compounded our woes. So that statement in defense of the Bank of Ghana is actually worse than before.
His basic point is that, yes, balance sheets of central banks used to be very important. But nowadays, it is not necessarily, especially in the wake of what happened during the financial sector difficulties in 2007, the global financial sector issues, global financial crisis, and then what has happened in COVID, where countries have had to print trillions of dollars to support their economy. Most banks have been running on negative equity, negative balance sheet for so long. So the banks are still able to do their job without necessarily having a clean or good balance sheet. That it's not as big a deal as you're making it sound. What do you say in defense of your position and stance?
See, so that is another classic example why I said he shouldn't have forayed into it. Now, I know he's an investment banker, and investment banking is still mostly termed casino banking. So he takes a lot of risks, including the reckless risks he's taking with this economy. That excuse is neither here nor there. And the simplest way to put it is the Senna, you cannot give what you do not have. Somebody comes to you to say, oh, can you lend me 100 Ghana cedi? You do not have 100 Ghana cedi. You don't have access to 100 Ghana cedi. How on earth are you going to give them that 100 Ghana cedi? So when he starts talking about the fact that the balance sheets of central banks do not matter, it is not true. Because you lend based on your balance sheet. Your balance sheet is basically a sheet, it's a summary of your assets and your liabilities. That gives your net position. So you start by listing, oh, the assets I have 100 Ghana cedis in my account. The liabilities I have, I only owe 50p Ghana cedis to other people. Therefore, your position as a balance sheet, you have got what? A positive balance sheet. Now, because you have a positive extra of 50 Ghana cedi, if somebody now comes to you to say, I need 10 Ghana cedi, or any of the banks you're supervising is in turmoil and you need to temporarily lend them money, then you can take some of the money you have, the 50 positive you have, and give to them. But Senna, if you do not have money, let us say you have 100 Ghana cedi and your debt is 150 Ghana cedi, which means you actually owe people. You are in negative equity territory, which is what we are talking about. So you don't have any money. And if you have to do anything, your owners have to inject equity into you. So as you said, you have no money at all. So if somebody then came to you and said, give me more money, how are you going to give that money? So you see that it is very defeatist. That very statement in itself is financially illiterate to say that the balance sheets of central banks do not matter. As we speak now, if you look at the audit report itself makes reference to that. It says that the position of the Bank of Ghana, where they have made so many losses and put themselves in negative equity position, it creates a problem with their ability to continue to execute their core mandate. Open market operations, price stability, as Professor Gachi talked about. And there are many tools you use to what? I mean, for example, if you want to stabilize your cedi against the dollar, you can release some dollars into the market because it's a demand and supply arrangement. But if you do not have dollars on your balance sheet and you are broke, and the cedi is dancing palugu, and you need to inject some dollars into the economy. And we have done this time and again. From the days of September, anytime the cedi was struggling and there was a shortage of dollar leading to a hike in the price of the cedi, the dollar relative to the cedi, you can release some money in there. And this government has done that. Over $500 million dollars it did in early 2020. It said it itself. So if we go by the by Ofori-Atta's statement that their balance sheet doesn't matter, if they didn't have that 500 million in their balance sheet, how would they have been able to release it into the market? Now, let us even look at Ofori-Atta's statement in its own right. At this stage, the reason we have not ended up running to the IMF is because they have finished all the money at the Bank of Ghana. All the money that Baumia said was there. They have printed and printed to a state where they are not even capable of printing anymore because the printing is creating more problems. So much so that they have printed as much as 60 billion of Bank of Ghana. Basically lent 60 billion to government of Ghana, and government of Ghana cannot pay. That is roughly about $6 billion. And that has made our situation worse so that we are not going to IMF for $3 billion. Now, let's ask ourselves, if Ofori-Atta is correct, that you don't need your balance sheet to be able to lend, where would they have got that 60 billion to give to government of Ghana? And that's where I come back to the point that you cannot give what you do not have. And so, you see, the Bank of Ghana has built an asset base. From the NDC left a huge, a strong Bank of Ghana to support them. They knew that. That is why they were able to use the Bank of Ghana to engage in financial sector cleanup, to engage in massive bond purchases and printing of money. If Bank of Ghana was handed over to them in the current state that they have, they wouldn't have been able to go. And this is why when we were telling them go to IMF, because Bank of Ghana should be a lender of last resort, they ignored us and went for their last killer, Bank of Ghana, and finished Bank of Ghana. Now, they are now exposed and they are going to IMF. So if you look at the various statements Ofori-Atta has made, it does not hold true that the balance sheets of central banks doesn't matter, because you lend based on your balance sheet. You cannot give what you do not have.
What about the suggestion that if you move from where you are, London, to New York, that's Washington, D.C., when you go to Turkey, wherever you are going to in this world, their central banks are also running negative equity because of the extraordinary times economies have faced since 2007. So what is happening at the Bank of Ghana is within a global context and must be looked at from that perspective. What do you say?
Again, I'm not really sure where he's getting his data from. Now, the reason I say so is that, as far as I'm aware, Bank of England is not running equity. Now, let me give you a very simple example. Last month, in the 22nd of August, and you can find this on this was written by the Telegraph Business and many other Financial Times and many other entities. The British government, the UK government, made its biggest payment ever to the Bank of England to fund the bond losses. Similar losses. You see, this borrowing that government of Ghana engaged in with Bank of Ghana, the extent to which the Bank of England equally engaged in quantitative easing, engaged in bond market activity on behalf of the government of the United Kingdom, that led them to make serious losses. The government of the UK transferred £14.3 billion. I don't even want to convert that into CEDIS because we will be trying. If you take the CD exchange rate at about 15 CD to the pound, they transferred 14.3 billion. Right? You are looking at well over 210 billion Ghana cedis to the Bank of England to cover off the losses that the Bank of England made through the bond purchases and quantitative easing, basically. So if he wants to compare, this is a situation. Let us say the Bank of Ghana did for government of Ghana what the Bank of England did for the government of the United Kingdom. After that, the losses that the Bank of England made, the government of the United Kingdom transferred money, paid back money to cover off those losses. Did the government of Ghana do that? So when you start saying, oh, their central banks are lending to their government, so our central bank was also lending to our government. Fine, that's correct. When their governments were paying back, did you also pay back? Can he show us one single country, including Sri Lanka or even Argentina, that has been serially bankrupt, where the government decided that the monies that they owe to the central bank, they cannot pay, so the central bank should write it off? Let him show one. So if you want to compare, you must compare completely and compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges. So that is one example that makes me, you remember I said at the beginning that what he has written is a tale of falsehood laced with half-truths and deliberate distortions. So yes, central banks across, they make price stability their what? Priority. And as soon as the market occasions it, they intervene to support. But the government makes sure they get back to where they should be to support tomorrow. So as we speak now, the Central Bank of Turkey, of US, of UK, they are fit and ready to be able to engage in more market operations for price stability. Is the Bank of Ghana ready? Is the Bank of Ghana fit? The Bank of Ghana is technically broke because they have more liabilities. They owe more than they own. So they are technically broke. And the one who owns them, who should in reality be supporting them, is also broke. So that's where that comparison doesn't make sense.
Now, there are two things he said. And the first one is because you are not just a member of the National Democratic Congress, you are seeking to lead their UK wing. Now, it's brought you back into the picture again. It says, Governor Addison, just like me, has faced major economic hurdles since 2017, inheriting a derailed IMF program and a highly impaired and ethically strained financial industry from our predecessors. Navigating the serious revenue shocks on the back of COVID-19 and distortions to our supply chain induced by both COVID-19 and international geopolitics. In resolving this, we all have had to make sacrifices, and the BoG balance sheet was significantly affected. That what the NDC left and what COVID did are the reasons we are here. What do you say?
So thank you very much. Two things. You see, you have COVID, you have Ukraine, you have NDC. Let us take them one at a time. If we start with the NDC, and I'm happy that he was deliberately comparing the total, operating income for the Bank of Ghana in 2016 versus the same in 2022. But again here, he left out crucial elements. The main reason we are where we are is because in the audit report of the Bank of Ghana, as much as almost 50 billion has been impaired, 50 billion of government owing to the central bank in 2022. In 2021, the impairment was roughly 24 million Ghana cedis. In 2022, it jumped to 48.4 billion. So let's just call it 50 billion. Now, if he is saying that now is better than then and they inherited a terrible situation, then we would expect that the impairments under President Mahama in 2016 would have been higher than this 48 billion. Let us go into 2016. In 2016, the impairment losses that were recognized were only 404 million Ghana cedis. So here you are. You said you inherited a bank that had impairment losses in terms of exposure to government at about 400 million Ghana cedis. And that you said was a terrible problem. It was a terrible situation. Now you have recorded what? 48 billion impairment. Incidentally, that's roughly 1%, less than 1% of what you inherited. Because if you work out 1% of 48 billion, you are looking at about 408 million, roughly, if my math is still correct.
Let's go.
And yet the NDC recorded impairment at Bank of England that was 404 million, which is less than 1% of the impairment of 48 billion that has been recorded. So can you say you inherited an impaired situation? You see, it doesn't make sense. Let us take other metrics. You inherited an economy that was running at 3.4% GDP growth. An economy that had inflation at around 15% stability, right? We were complaining that interest rates then was around 24%. So if you look at all those ones, and the CD exchange rate was roughly 3.5 thereabouts, 3.4 to the dollar. If you look at the bucket of price stability as we speak, you look at inflation, you look at interest rates, you look at the CD depreciation. And I've just said it, about 3.4 was the CD depreciation then. Interest rates was roughly around 24%, and inflation was roughly what? Around 15%. Now, if that was terrible, the situation we are in now is that you look at the headline inflation rate that the Bank of Ghana gave for its 2022 report. They reported 54.1%. Interest rates alone, you are looking at over 40%, 35 to 40% compared to the 20% roughly. The CD exchange rate now to the dollar is about 12 to the CD, more than 4 times what was there. So how is it possible that you inherited a very terrible situation? You have fixed it. And by the time you finish fixing it, your CD exchange rate depreciates by more than 4 times. It goes from 3.4 to 12 to the CD. Your interest rates is gone up by more than about double, from about 20% to 40%. Your inflation has almost quadrupled. It has moved from 15% to 54%. So you see why I say that what he wrote was intellectually dishonest and completely laced with untruths. So it is not true. In any case, the simple term, remember, let's go back to the balance sheet question that we talked about, where I said, if you don't have something, you cannot lend. Based on the balance sheet of the Bank of Ghana and the government of Ghana, Oforiatta himself admits in the statement that they were able to borrow as much as $10 billion since 2017, right? That tells you that the government of Ghana was credit worthy. I'm not even talking about our credit rating, but based on our ability, the market looked at us and said, yes, you can pay your debt. So they lent us $10 billion dollars in Eurobonds alone, including that you add all the other bilateral and multilateral debts from Afro-Exim Bank and so on and so forth. Now, come fast forward, and this is the disabled impaired economy. Fast forward to September 2021. The same people who lent you the 10 billion now tell you that you are not credit worthy, we will not lend money to you. So they froze us out of the market, and they have since not given us $1 single in Eurobond funding since September 2021. So you see that by their actions, you shall know them. If it is true that you inherited an impaired economy that allowed you to go to the market and borrow $10 billion, how is it that now your improved economy, which is better than that time, cannot even get you to borrow $1 from them? So you see, from that perspective, it doesn't make sense. Then he talks about COVID and Ukraine and all that stuff. I'm happy he has not yet mentioned Niger. Although I did notice somebody was talking about, Brana Champon was talking about the fact that we import $24 million worth of onions from Niger. So expect that to come. My simple question there, is Ghana an island? Because when he was comparing the role of central banks in supporting price stability and supporting governments in turmoil, he mentioned Turkey, he mentioned Argentina, he mentioned US, he mentioned UK. So now that we have come to COVID-19, they did not affect all the other countries. In fact, it affected the UK and the US and the Western countries much more than it affected Ghana. Their own analysis in COVID-19 said Ghana did very well and managed it very well. So if you manage it very well, it means it didn't hit your economy as much. In any case, are we an island? If you come off the Gulf of Guinea, you have got Togo to the east and Benin further east and Nigeria further east. You go to the west, you have got Cote d'Ivoire, and then you go down Liberia, you have Gambia. You go further up north, we have got war-torn Burkina Faso, war-torn Mali, war-torn Niger. And yet, none of them is in the chaotic economic position we are in. So how do you blame COVID that affected everybody? Senna, when the rain comes, and you get wet and everybody else has an umbrella and they are not wet, you don't blame the rain. You blame your visionlessness. You blame your inability to make sure you are prepared for the rain and to have an umbrella when the rain comes. And that's why those excuses don't make sense.
Let me conclude then by reading to you this portion where he talks about the fact that it's not been all bad. In fact, he says, in these nearly 7 years, we have worked together to ensure the inviolability of the banking system, the establishment of the Consolidated Bank of Ghana and the Development Bank of Ghana, the raising of over $10 billion in the Eurobond market and Afrexim Bank. He has brought inflation down to single digits of 7.9% and managed an impressive period of currency stability in our country, including the implementation of a Gold for Oil program. He steps up in an unprecedented period of global economic meltdown and domestic economic crisis, yet he's being pilloried. And he continues to make a plea using the Bible that the challenges that confront us are surmountable, as we can all bear witness to the fact that the economy is beginning to turn the corner, and we are confident that, quote, he who begins a good work in us will carry it on to completion. What do you say?
You see, anytime this man quotes the Bible, then we are told, even the good book, the Bible says that even the devil quotes scripture. And so anytime he's engaging in this outright falsehood we have just exposed, and then he starts quoting the verse, then it tells me, look, even the good book says, thou shalt not what? Invoke the name of the Lord in vain. He's invoking sacred scriptures in vain to support outright falsehoods, untruths, and complete dishonesty. Just look at the numbers he has put out. You see, this is what I said. Ghana made a terrible mistake of making an investment banker our economy minister or finance minister. The reason is investment bankers pride themselves in how much funding they are able to raise for companies and governments, how much borrowing they are able to raise, because they get a percentage of it. As you would see, he was making over 150 million from government of Ghana borrowing. So whenever they sit down, they say, oh yes, we're able to borrow 1 billion for this government or this company and we've made profits. He brought that same attitude to government of Ghana and he has sunk government of Ghana finances. Look at him telling us that it's not all gloom and doom because we have borrowed from Exim Bank. How is borrowing an achievement? He admits that they have borrowed over 10 billion in euro bonds. How is that an achievement? If anything, that is why we are where we are. Because you have overborrowed to your point where it's beyond your capacity to service. So what he actually mentioned, if he really was thinking about what he was doing, if he was sober enough, he should have shut up about it. Because what he's mentioned is actually his roll call of shame. The shameful borrowing that has put us in this ditch. So if I were him, or I don't know whether this was read, this statement he issued was read by any other person who was sober enough. Because clearly this man is on the bench and he's not sober yet. But let's go back to, you see, I tell you that the man has been dishonest in the statement. I didn't say it for nothing. He says what? That the government has delivered 7.9% inflation. What was the inflation rate? You go to the very top of the 2020 statement. Yeah, the very, very top of that. When you get to page 2, after the cover page, the very next one, page 2 of that 148 annual financial report, it says the year in numbers end December 2022. It talks about target inflation. This is what they were targeting. 8% plus or minus 2. So they were expecting to achieve inflation of between 6% and 10%. It talks about what was the headline inflation, 54.1%. So where is Oforiatta getting his 7.9% from? Because the second page, the actual first page, if you go straight into it, page 2, is written in bold and colored in gold letters, if not brass letters. It says what? Headline inflation, 54.1%. And yet this man comes to sit here and tell us that the Bank of Ghana has done very well. They achieved 7.9% inflation. Therefore, we should stop pillorying him. Look, sometimes silence is golden. In this case, they have messed up. It is very clear that he knows that the Bank of Ghana messed up by coming to his help. The Bank of Ghana should have told him where he needed all that money to rather cut expenditure, cut frivolous expenditure to balance the books. Instead, they joined him when he was completely drunk in giving him another gallon of akpeteshi. And that has finished him and finished our economy. The last thing they should be doing is talking now. If they have to talk, they should be apologetic for their sins and for crashing the economy and destroying Bank of Ghana. All that he is saying, it does not wash and it's completely unacceptable.